Shalom and welcome to Temple Talk. This is Yitzchak Reuven speaking to you from south of Jerusalem. Today is the 27th day of the month of Kislev, 5783. It's the third night and the third light of Chanukah. Chanukah Sameach, everybody. Wishing everybody a very, very happy Chanukah. Today is also December 20th, 2022. This coming Shabbat we read Parashat Miketz, the end of Miketz from the book of Genesis, beginning with chapter 41, verse 1, concluding with chapter 44, verse 17. And this coming Shabbat, which is the 6th day of Chanukah, is also Shabbat Rosh Chodesh. It's the first of a 2-day Rosh Chodesh new month celebration, celebrating the incoming month of Tevet. And as you know, Chanukah is the only holiday in the Hebrew calendar which spans over 2 months, beginning in the final days of the month of Kislev and continuing into the first days of the month of Tevet. So that means there's always a day or two, in which Rosh Chodesh, the new month, overlaps with Chanukah. And as you know, on Chanukah we add an extra tefillah, an extra prayer into our Shemona Esrei, into our standing prayer that we say 3 times a day, and that is called Al Anisim. And on Shabbat, of course, we have additional prayers, and on Rosh Chodesh we also add Ya'aleh V'Yavos. So the tefillah, the prayer service on Rosh Chodesh, Shabbat, Chanukah, which also, of course, includes the Hallel tefillot, the Hallel prayers, the Hallel songs of praise that we say every day of the 8 days of Chanukah, makes for a very, very long, a very involved Shabbat tefillah prayer service. And of course there are all different additional readings from the Torah in addition to the weekly reading. So it's going to be a busy Shabbat, this coming Shabbat, and I think it's also the shortest Shabbat in the year, as in the least hours of sunlight. But of course, when we light up the Chanukah, which we do, of course, before Shabbat begins, Friday evening, just before it gets dark, and of course after Shabbat ends on Motzei Shabbat, and Saturday evening after the sun has set and the stars have come out and we've concluded Shabbat, that provides all the light that we need, illuminating our world. I want to talk about 2 things in particular in this edition of Temple Talk. One, of course, is the parasha Miketz, and the other is to focus on Chanukah. So concerning Miketz, this is it. This is the big, the story of Yosef and his brothers now goes into high gear. This is where it really gets exciting, where it really gets dramatic, and every year, to me, it's breathtaking. You know, I know the story. I know how it goes. I know how it begins. I know how it ends. But it never fails to take my breath away. It never fails to choke me up. It is such a story with such tremendous pathos and emotion and meaning that to us it's so important. This reconciliation, slow and painful reconciliation between the brothers Yosef and his brothers, who, of course, as we know, had sold him into slavery, and now they've gone down into Egypt. Well, let's not jump ahead. Let's begin with the first few verses from Miketz, in Hebrew than in English. The book of Genesis, chapter 41, verse 1. Vayihi miketz shenatayim yamim ufar'o cholem v'hine omed al ya'or v'hine min ha'ya'or olot sheva parot yafot mar'e uvri'ot basar v'tira'ena ba'ahu והנה שבע פרות אחרות עולות אחריהן מן היאור רעות מראה ודקות בשר ותעמודנה אצל הפרות על שפת היאור ותאכלנה הפרות רעות המראה ודקות הבשר את שבע הפרות יפות המראה והבריאות ויקץ פרעה. It happened at the end of 2 years to the day, meaning this is 2 years to the day that the Sar HaMashkeh, that the cupbearer of Pharaoh, was released from prison, and his baker was hung. 2 years to the day, which happened to be Pharaoh's birthday. We read about that last parsha. It happened to be Pharaoh's birthday, so he's 2 years older now, and he has this dream. It happened at the end of 2 years to the day. Pharaoh was dreaming that, behold, he was standing over the river, and of course the river is the Nile, when, behold, out of the river there emerged 7 cows of beautiful appearance and robust flesh, and they were grazing in the marshland. Then, behold, 7 other cows emerged after them out of the river, of ugly appearance and gaunt flesh, and they stood next to the cows on the bank of the river. The cows of ugly appearance and gaunt flesh ate the 7 cows of beautiful appearance and robust. And Pharaoh awoke. He fell asleep and dreamt a second time, and behold, 7 ears of grain were sprouting on a single stalk, healthy and good. And behold, 7 ears, thin and scorched by the east wind, were growing after them. Then the 7 thin ears swallowed up the 7 healthy and full ears. Pharaoh awoke, and behold, it had been a dream. And it was in the morning, his spirit was agitated, so he sent and summoned all the necromancers, all the wise men of Egypt. Pharaoh related his dream to them, but none could interpret them for Pharaoh. Then the chamberlain of the cupbearer spoke up before Pharaoh, saying, My transgressions do I mention today. Pharaoh had become incensed at his servants and placed me in the ward in the house of the chamberlain of the butchers, me and the chamberlain of the bakers. We dreamt a dream on the same night, and I and he, each one according to the interpretation of his dream did we dream. And there with us was a Hebrew youth, a slave of the chamberlain of the butchers. We related it to him, and he interpreted our dreams for us. He interpreted for each in accordance with his dream, and it was that just as he interpreted for us, so did it happen. He restored to my post, and him he hanged. So Pharaoh sent and summoned Yosef, and they rushed him from the dungeon. He shaved and changed his clothes, and he came to Pharaoh. And Pharaoh said to Yosef, I dreamt a dream, but no one can interpret it. Now I heard it said of you, that you comprehend a dream to interpret it. Yosef answered Pharaoh, saying, That is beyond me. It is God who will respond to Pharaoh's welfare. And of course, Pharaoh then shares his dreams, and Yosef says it's one dream, it's a single dream, and it means 7 years of a bounteous crop in Egypt, and in 7 years of famine. The famine will be so severe that it will wipe away all memory, all sign of the 7 good years, just like the 7 lean cows and the 7 parched ears of corn swallowed up the 7 healthy cows and the 7 healthy ears of corn. And that's what God is telling Pharaoh, Yosef tells him. And Yosef continues. He doesn't stop. He's very bold here. He says, and what Pharaoh needs to do is appoint a wise man over all the land who will have all the extra crops, the extra bounty from the 7 good years to be stored away in silos and then distributed throughout the 7 bad years. And Pharaoh looks around and he says, I don't see anybody here wiser than you. I mean, you're the one who interpreted my dream when nobody else could. I'm putting you in charge. So this, of course, is the meteoric rise of Yosef from the prison, from the pit that his brothers threw him into, from slavery, from the prison that he had been thrown into, the dungeon, and now he's risen to the top, only below Pharaoh in stature. Pharaoh dresses him up in royal clothes. He gives him his own ring, puts it on his finger. He says, you are next to me, the most powerful man in Egypt. Everybody has to answer to you. And gives him a new name. And he gives him the daughter of the the priest of On, Osnat is her name, gives him as a wife. They have 2 children, Menashe and Ephraim, and the 7 good years come and they store up all the good grain, and the 7 bad years come, and Egypt is distributing food to the hungry, and there's famine all throughout the area, all throughout the land, all throughout the region, and including Canaan, where Yaakov and his sons are, where we last left them. And Yaakov says to his sons, I've heard that there's food in Egypt. Very interesting that he heard this. Obviously there was some kind of news. People would travel and they would bring news. So he heard that far away in Egypt was food, and he sends his sons down to Egypt, and of course they arrive there, and Yosef recognizes them. How could he forget them? But they don't recognize Yosef. Some people find it hard how could he not recognize Yosef? But Yosef was a boy when they last saw him. Now he's a man. Yosef, when they last saw him, probably hadn't grown a beard yet, hadn't shaved even. Now he's a man, and now he's dressed in royal Egyptian clothes, and whatever other accoutrements that the highest echelon of the ruling class in Egypt adorned themselves with. Maybe there was makeup, who knows? I think it's very, very believable that they won't recognize him. Why would they? He probably has some kind of headdress on, and he looks very different, and he's speaking the Egyptian tongue. But he, of course, recognizes them, and this is it. He is going to put them to a test. And we all know the test, that he accuses them of spying on the land. Of course, they deny it, but he says that he'll only let them go back to their own land if one of them stays. He's going to put one in prison. He takes Shimon, puts him in prison, and they go back, and on the way back, they each look in their knapsacks, and they find money, and they're very terrified. What's going on here? They don't understand. In the meantime, as we know, as soon as they sense trouble, they started to point at themselves and saying, we know the source of this trouble. It's because of what we did to our brother, what we did to him. And it's very interesting because they mention here that they said to one another, this is verse 21, chapter 42, indeed we are all guilty concerning our brother, inasmuch as we saw his heartfelt anguish when he pleaded with us, and we paid no heed. This is why this anguish has come upon us. So they are reading everything into this moment. When they took Yosef and they stripped him of his garment of his striped garment, his technicolor coat, and threw him in the pit, we're not told of Yosef's reaction. We're not told that he cried out to them. We're not told that he fought back. Anything. All of a sudden here, they are remembering, they're still haunted by this, that he cried out to them, and they didn't care. They didn't care. When he approaches them, going back to last week's parsha, when he approached them from afar, after he met that stranger who told him where they were, and he approached them, and he said to the stranger said, who are you looking for? He said, I'm looking for my brothers. And when he approached them, they saw him from afar, they said, ooh, there's that dreamer. They didn't say, there's our brother, that dreamer. They said, there's that dreamer. He wasn't their brother. They didn't consider him their brother. That's how great their animosity was toward him, their jealousy, their anger. And now it's all coming back to them, and they're falling apart. They are falling apart. And he is being very, very tough on them. And so he sends them back, and they go back, and they have to explain to their father what happened to Shimon, and that they can't go back without Binyamin. And his father said, no way. I lost my son Yosef, and now I've lost my son Shimon. I'm not going to let you take Binyamin. I'm not going to risk losing Binyamin, the only surviving son of my beloved wife, Rachel. I'm not going to let you take her. Time passes, and Yaakov says, you got to go down to Egypt. We have no food left. And they say, remember, we have to bring Binyamin. And of course, he's convinced. First, Reuven. Remember, Reuven tried to save Yosef, and he failed because he walked away, and when he came back, he was gone. Now he wants to vouch for his safe return. And he says, if I don't return Yosef, then you can kill my sons, which is really not a pleasant way to pledge your little brother's security. Not for you, not for your father. What Yaakov's going to have his Reuven's sons killed? If God forbid he doesn't come back with Binyamin, that doesn't work. And then Yehuda steps up and he says, I guarantee you have to trust me. You just have to trust me. I guarantee you that I will keep Binyamin safe and return him to you. With little choice, really, because they're running out of food very quickly. Yaakov sends them back. He also makes them go back with the money that they had found in their knapsacks when they left. And he also sends them with a gift of certain products from the land to bring to this mysterious man who's second in command to Pharaoh. And now, of course, when they go back, they are taken right to Yosef's house, and they say to each other, oh boy, this is because of the money, right? This is because of the money that he gave us, that we don't know where it came from, and now we're going to be, accused of taking it or something. So immediately they say, listen, here's the money, we brought it back. We didn't ask for it, we don't want it, we're bringing it back. And then they're welcome into Yosef's house. They eat at his table. And of course, the Hebrews here, the brothers can't sit right beside the Egyptians, because the Egyptians, they're an abomination to the Egyptians. The Egyptians look down upon these Canaanite people, so to speak, these Hebrews from Canaan. Now, Canaan was under the political influence of Egypt, but it was a backwater. Like the backwoodsmen lived there, the rough people, the shepherds, right? Egyptians didn't really hold shepherds in high esteem. They were they were the lower class. So they sit at separate tables, but in any case, they're all eating together, dining together, and Yosef sends them back with many things, with gifts, including 5 times the amount for Binyamin as for the others, testing to see if they still have jealousy. They were jealous when he got himself, when his father gave him that beautiful coat. Are they going to be jealous that he's bequeathing Binyamin with 5 times as many garments as them? But they passed that test. But Yosef plots against them, and he has his silver chalice, his silver cup, placed in the knapsack of Binyamin. After they leave the city, he sends someone after them to search and says, somebody took my master Yosef's silver cup. And his brothers say, well, no, none of us would take it. I mean, after all, we returned the money that we found in our bags after we came back from Canaan, from Canaan, and returned it. You think we're going to take this? Goes from brother to brother, starting with the oldest, concluding with the youngest, Binyamin, of course. And there it is, and boom, they are crestfallen. They are heart sunk. They don't know what to do. They're brought back. And Yosef says, well, you think I wasn't going to catch on to what you guys are up to? And this is the real test. He says, the brothers said, you know what? First they say, before they discover the silver cup, they say, you can kill the person who took it and the rest of us take into slavery. That's how innocent they were. They knew they were. Then when it's discovered, the Egyptians say, no, only the person who took it is going to be a slave, and the rest of you can go back. They go back to Yosef's house. Yosef said, you can go back to your father, enjoy yourselves. This one who took the silver chalice, he will stay with me. Sorry, guys, and this is the big test. are they going to allow what happened to Binyamin, what they did to his brother? Now, there's a few things that are unique. First time in the Torah that we come across these things in this parsha. One is the brothers' regret that we mentioned before, that they saw their brother in anguish and they had no feeling for him, right? They're expressing compassion. They're expressing true regret for what they did. When Yosef sees Binyamin for the first time, as we read in Miketz, he is so overcome with emotion that he has to go out of the room, and he cries, and then he washes his face and comes back. What we're experiencing here for the first time in the entire book of Genesis is true expressions of brotherly love, real brotherly love, real feeling for one another, real caring, real compassion, real senses of responsibility. Didn't happen till now. Cain killed Abel, and Cain said, "What am I? My brother's I'm a keeper? I'm supposed to, I have a responsibility to him." He didn't get it, right? He didn't get it. And then, of course, we have Ishmael who made fun of Yitzhak, and those brothers they went their own separate ways. They had no connection. And of course, Yaakov and Esav, where they were at odds with one another from the very start, from birth. They were fighting and struggling. Even when they met after all those years, after Yaakov returned from 20 years working for Lavan, returned to the land of Israel, and they met, and Yaakov was expecting, a fight to the finish, but they embraced, kissed, hugged and kissed, embraced, and they say, "It's good to see you, brother." They went their own separate ways. They didn't even venture to stick together or to work things out or to talk about, let's talk about what's happened. Let's work things out. Let's make it up. No. So yes, they had an amicable parting, but they didn't pursue their kinship beyond that. This is the first time that there's a real expression of brotherly love, compassion, concern, care, responsibility. This is what God has been looking for ever since you created man. This is God's been waiting for. This is God's been working toward. God, as we know, made all these things happen. He helped to make the break. He helped them set up the situation, the animosity which would lead to a reconciliation. God played a huge part in all this, but would have all been for naught if the brothers at some point, and that point takes place right here in Miketz, if the brothers had picked up the ball, as it were, and showed some emotion, showed some human concern for one another. Be human beings, care. And it's happening here, and this is going to make all the difference in the world. Because once God sees that we can care for one another, put our differences aside, forgive one another, we can admit to our own errors, our own wrongdoing, and ask for forgiveness, and we can forgive. That is the basis for a world in which not only can we get along and live with one another, but a world in which God's presence can dwell amongst us. Because as long as we are fighting and throwing one another in a pit and lying to our Father about it, that's no place for Hashem's presence to dwell. So this is what's happening in this week's Parsha. And this is what makes it such an emotional blockbuster that just moves me every year that I read it. Because, the actual action, the actual plot, we all know. But every year, the revelation of the humanity within the brothers, each of them, their own realization of their own feelings is always moves me. I want to take a break now from the Parsha, take the last 10 minutes of our show and talk about Chanukah. As you know, we have a new section on our website, templeinstitute.org, all about Chanukah, the origins of Chanukah, and I encourage anybody who hasn't seen it yet to have a look at it, because you'll learn a lot, I believe. It's quite comprehensive. If you go to the Temple Institute website, once again, templeinstitute.org, and go on to the main menu, Study Tools, and under Study Tools you have Days of Note, and under Days of Note you have Chanukah, and you can learn all about Chanukah, why it's 8 days, why we celebrate it to begin with, why it's an important holiday, when it began, and why we celebrate it to this day. And again, I want to state that Hanukkah is not simply a holiday of spinning a dreidel and eating donuts, sufganiyot, as we call them in Hebrew, or of giving presents to our children each of the 8 nights of Hanukkah. Those are very nice customs, but that's not what Hanukkah is really all about. And Hanukkah is about 2 things, 2 perspectives, main things. One is, of course, the miracle of the 1 cruse of oil discovered by the Kohanim, the temple priests, when they went in to sanctify the temple. And there was enough oil for a single day of the menorah, of lighting the menorah, but it lasted for 8 days, enough time to allow them, to grant them to produce new pure olive oil. Okay. But that miracle came after the victory of the Maccabees, also known as Hashmonaim, or Hasmoneans, over the Syrian Greek invaders, occupiers, oppressors. A victory that gave them control over the Temple Mount. Didn't give them control over a lot of other things, and certainly not over all the land, not even over all of Jerusalem, but it gave them control over the Temple Mount, so they were able to repurify and recreate the vessels that had been stolen or destroyed, remake an altar which had been defiled, and restart the temple service on the 25th of Kislev, the first day of Hanukkah, and have a dedication ceremony. Of course, the word Chanukah means dedication, which lasted 8 days. And they did it in the face of the world powers who wanted to see their way of life destroyed, wiped out, if it wasn't going to happen. And it was happening, unfortunately, through assimilation, Hellenization, we call it, referring to the adoption of the Greek culture at the time, which had become the universal culture to a great extent throughout the Middle East, the Mediterranean area, what we used to call, when I was a kid in school, the known world. But of course, only it was known to the people who knew it. There were plenty of other people who knew other things at the time. But the Israelites, the Jews, because they were from Judea now. This is a second temple era, and the area that the returnees from Babylon were able to take control of was Judea. So these are now Judeans or Jews, and they fought back. Of course, we know Mattatyahu, the son of the high priest Yochanan, and his 5 sons led this rebellion. And I've said this many times. Why am I saying it again? Because we're still fighting that fight today, for real. It's big time. We're fighting it here in Israel and in the world. Because, of course, as we know, during the time of the Maccabees, it wasn't only the Syrian Greeks that were trying to oppress us. It was also from within. There were Hellenizers, Jews who had assimilated into the Greek lifestyle and were very much wanted the rest of the Jews to assimilate. They very much wanted to move on, leave that Torah lifestyle behind, just be part of the world, get on with it. And so it was a civil war as well. A civil war in real hot war terms, and also a civil war in terms of a cultural civil war. Now, there was just an editorial in the New York Times, what they call it, the newspaper of note, the newspaper of thinking people. I don't know what those people are thinking. And the New York Times basically reflects what the United States administration is thinking. And so I'm just going to continue, when I say the New York Times, I mean the Biden administration. If I say the Biden administration, I also mean the New York Times and everybody on the progressive, liberal, progressive political side of the United States map. Not to mention the rest of the world, especially Europe, mainly Europe. They're so upset that Israel has a new government that's so fanatically right-wing, benighted. Why? Because many of the people in the government are religious, observant Jews. 3 of the parties within the government are parties that define themselves as parties of observant Jews. And what are the things that the New York Times in their editorial the other day stated that puts democracy in danger? Of course, that's what you say when you want to. It's code word for destroy Israel. Putting democracy in danger. One is, they might legalize settlements in the West Bank and Judea, Samaria. That's going to endanger democracy. That's going to put an end to democracy. Really? Because people who are Israeli citizens living in towns that are Israeli towns but don't have all the services or all the rights and privileges that other Israelis on the other side of an imaginary armistice line, which hasn't existed for 60 years, are going to have their rights on the same footing as the others. That's the end of democracy? How so? Or, here's the good one. Here's the best one. Because this government wants to give Jews the right to vote, the right to pray freely and move freely on the Temple Mount. Oh my God, we know what that's going to lead to. It's going to lead to war. What nerve this government has. What a benighted government that they want to push to finally, even though Israeli courts, which, God forbid you touch the Israeli courts according to these same sources. The Israeli courts, the Israeli judges for decades have been saying, yes, Jews do legally have the same rights in the Temple Mount, but no government has ever told the police to enforce those rights. Isn't that what police are supposed to do? Enforce and enable people to enjoy the privileges and rights of being citizens of a country. But according to the New York Times and according to spokespeople from the Biden administration, this is a very, very bad thing to pursue. Freedom of religion. What nerve? What did they come up with this idea of freedom of religion? Equality. The end of discrimination. What do you think they're doing? They're so backwards. So you know what? Why am I mentioning this in the context of Chanukah? Because it's the same story. It's the exact same story. These liberal and progressive forces that are out there today that are very powerful in public life in the United States, in Europe, they hate the idea of an independent Israel. They hate the idea of a way of life, a religion, a culture, a civilization that is not the same as theirs, that thinks differently, that has its own set of priorities, that has its own land and its own history and its own obligations. They're against that. So we're fighting them just like we fought the Greek Syrian oppressors way back when. We're fighting the forces of Western forces of oppression today, as well as those same forces within our own society who would love to Hellenize just as our ancestors did back in the day. But we're going to win just like the Maccabees did. We're going to win. And I want to wish everybody a very, very happy Chanukah. Temple Talk.